In the year 1519, the Aztec Empire stood as a towering colossus in the heart of Mesoamerica, one of the most advanced and formidable civilizations of its time. Encompassing more than 800,000 square miles and governing roughly 6 million subjects, this empire boasted one of the largest and most densely populated cities on Earth, Tenochtitlan. This bustling metropolis, built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, rivaled anything Europe could offer, with sophisticated infrastructure, aqueducts, floating gardens, and a thriving cultural and religious life. Its leader, Emperor Moctezuma II, was no figurehead. He was an educated, perceptive man, deeply respected by his people and feared by his enemies. Under his command, the empire's military might kept vassal states in check, enforced tribute systems, and ensured the continued dominance of Aztec culture and power. But incredibly, just 2.5 years later, this sprawling empire would lie in ruins, its temples burned, its capital gutted, and its civilization irreversibly changed. The cause of this collapse wasn't an invasion by tens of thousands of foreign troops or a calamitous natural disaster. It wasn't a famine or internal civil war. Instead, it was the result of an expedition composed of approximately 500 Spanish men, rebels who, by all rights, should never have been there in the first place. Led by an ambitious and unauthorized conquistador, this small force would exploit tribal resentment, introduce devastating diseases, and manipulate communication in a way no native group anticipated. This is not just a tale of conquest. It is a lesson in how strategy, timing, and unintended consequences can bring down even the greatest of empires. Before the Spanish ever set foot on the mainland of what is now Mexico, they had already laid claim to several Caribbean islands, including Cuba, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. These early colonial outposts provided strategic bases for further exploration, and whispers soon began to circulate among Spanish sailors and adventurers of a land to the west, vast, populated, and glittering with unimaginable wealth. Stories spoke of cities made of gold and a civilization that surpassed anything found on the islands. Governor Diego Velázquez of Cuba, intrigued and eager to uncover this hidden treasure, began organizing expeditions to explore the mysterious mainland. After 2 initial scouting missions, he prepared a third and more ambitious venture, placing it under the command of his brother-in-law, Hernán Cortés. Cortés was charming, sharp, and experienced in colonial warfare, but he was also dangerously ambitious. Many of Velázquez's closest advisors distrusted him, and their concerns proved valid. Just before departure, Velázquez tried to revoke the order, suspecting Cortés had plans of his own. Cortés, learning of this, acted swiftly. Ignoring the governor's decision, he rallied his men and set sail, thereby committing a bold act of mutiny. With only around 500 soldiers, a dozen horses, and limited artillery, his expedition was hardly an imposing force, especially against a mighty empire. But Cortés had a gamble in mind. If he could find enough land and gold to impress the Spanish crown, he could rewrite his status from outlaw to hero. What he didn't know then was that his gamble would pay off in ways more dramatic and more destructive than anyone could have imagined. Before we move on, I'd like to share something with you. Just like Cortés set out on his daring expedition, hoping to reach something greater, this channel is on a mission too, to reach 1,000 subscribers by June 30th. If you're enjoying the story and want to support this journey, consider subscribing. It only takes a second, but it makes a huge difference. Upon reaching the Yucatán Peninsula, Cortés anchored his fleet near the island of Cozumel, a territory held by the Maya. The island provided a safe landing site where the Spaniards could rest, regroup, and resupply before pushing inland. The Spanish had already made contact with the Maya during previous voyages, and relations were relatively peaceful. An unusual, but welcome development. During his brief stay, Cortés heard rumors of two white men living among the native tribes on the mainland. Intrigued, he sent out a search party and soon confirmed the story. Two Spanish sailors had survived a shipwreck 8 years earlier and had since lived with the Maya. One of them had fully integrated into the community, taken a local wife, and refused to return. The other, a friar named Jerónimo de Aguilar, agreed to join Cortés's expedition. Aguilar had mastered the Yucatec Maya language during his years in captivity, and his knowledge would prove critical. But the real breakthrough came shortly afterward when Cortés encountered a group of native slaves gifted to him by a defeated Maya lord. Among them was a young woman known to history as Malintzin, or La Malinche, whom the Spaniards baptized as Marina. She was fluent in both Maya and Nahuatl, the Aztec lingua franca. Together, Aguilar and Marina formed a linguistic bridge that allowed Cortés to communicate with the indigenous people of the region. This accidental pairing would prove to be one of the most pivotal developments of the entire campaign. With Marina's help, Cortés could not only understand his enemies, but also manipulate alliances and navigate the political complexities of the region in ways that would have been impossible without her. As Cortés moved along the Gulf Coast, he encountered resistance from local Maya and Totonac groups who were largely unfamiliar with Europeans. Battles broke out, but the Spaniards, armed with steel weapons, mounted cavalry and primitive firearms, managed to overpower their opponents. After a key victory near the town of Potonchan, the local leaders sued for peace, offering gold, food, and a group of enslaved women as tribute. Among these women was Marina. Initially viewed simply as another gift of war, she quickly distinguished herself by her linguistic prowess. Her knowledge of Nahuatl allowed Cortés to engage directly, via translation, with various leaders and communities under Aztec rule. At first, communication passed from Spanish to Maya via Aguilar, and then from Maya to Nahuatl via Marina. But Marina soon learned Spanish, reducing the language chain and dramatically improving diplomatic exchanges. She wasn't just a translator, she became a strategist, confidant, and even consort to Cortés. Together they began to uncover a crucial vulnerability within the Aztec system. Though the Aztecs commanded a vast empire, they governed through fear and tribute rather than integration. Conquered city-states were allowed to keep their rulers and traditions, but they were forced to pay heavy tributes of goods, labor, and warriors. This led to widespread resentment, and many subjects harbored deep hatred for the Aztecs. Marina's role was indispensable in identifying and cultivating these grievances. The seeds of rebellion were already there. Cortés simply offered them an opportunity. And with every village or tribe that turned against the empire, the Spanish force grew in strength, allies, and momentum. What had begun as an unlawful expedition was now evolving into something far more dangerous, a full-scale rebellion disguised as conquest. Armed with linguistic tools and newfound allies, Cortés pressed deeper into the mainland. In April 1519, his fleet anchored near the region now known as Veracruz. There, a diplomatic surprise awaited him. Emissaries from the Aztec Empire sent directly by Emperor Moctezuma II. These envoys didn't come with weapons or threats, but instead bore lavish gifts, including precious textiles, ornate jewelry, and most notably gleaming items made of solid gold. Moctezuma had been observing the Spaniards' arrival and chose a diplomatic gesture over confrontation, at least for the moment. While the Aztec leader may have hoped to appease the newcomers and send them on their way, the golden tribute had the opposite effect. Cortés now had tangible proof that the land harbored the wealth he had been promised. The glint of Aztec gold ignited the ambitions of his men and reaffirmed his belief that fortune and glory lay further inland. Seizing the moment, he founded a new settlement, naming it La Villa Rica de la Veracruz, or the rich village of the True Cross. This wasn't just a village, it was a strategic base, a formal statement of Spanish presence, and more importantly, a legal loophole. By establishing a municipality loyal directly to the Spanish crown, Cortés aimed to bypass Velázquez and justify his continued expedition under royal authority. Meanwhile, the surrounding regions began to reveal more about the tensions festering beneath the surface of the Aztec domain. Through Marina and Aguilar, Cortés learned that many indigenous groups, such as the Totonacs, were deeply resentful of Aztec domination. They paid crippling tributes and lived under constant threat of punishment. These were not loyal subjects, but potential partners in rebellion. For Cortés, diplomacy would prove as powerful as gunpowder. The Totonacs were the first significant native group to formally ally with the Spanish. After welcoming Cortés and his men into their city, they openly expressed disdain for Aztec rule, describing years of oppressive taxation and forced conscription. The local rulers saw in the Spaniards a chance to disrupt the balance of power and reclaim their autonomy. In return for their support, they offered Cortés hundreds of warriors, laborers to expand the fledgling settlement of Vera Cruz, and even helped imprison local Aztec tribute collectors. This bold defiance did not go unnoticed. Moctezuma was informed almost immediately, but, curiously, chose not to retaliate with military force. Instead, he sent even more lavish offerings, perhaps hoping to buy time or keep the Spaniards pacified. Historians continue to debate his motives. Was it fear? Was it strategy? Was it a misreading of the threat posed by these foreigners? From Cortés's perspective, it was a golden opportunity. Still, not all Spaniards were as committed to this uncertain campaign. A group of disillusioned soldiers began to plot a return to Cuba to inform Velázquez of Cortés's rogue mission. The plan was simple: steal the ships and escape. But word of the conspiracy reached Cortés. He responded swiftly and brutally, executing the ringleaders and ordering all the ships scuttled, burned and sunk to the bottom of the bay. The message was clear: retreat was no longer an option. Whether they lived or died, they would do so together, on the soil of a foreign land. That act of forced commitment transformed the expedition. No longer just a group of adventurers, the Spaniards now had the resolve and the desperation of men with no way back. Their only direction was forward, deeper into the empire they hoped to conquer. With their ships destroyed and their path sealed, Cortés and his men set their sights inland, moving cautiously yet confidently toward the core of the Aztec Empire. Their next major encounter was with the Tlaxcalans, a powerful confederation of indigenous city-states, fiercely independent and, more importantly, mortal enemies of the Aztecs. Cortés expected diplomacy might sway them to his cause, just as it had with the Totonacs. But the Tlaxcalans were not easily convinced. Viewing the Spanish with suspicion and seeing their metal weapons and horses as ominous signs, they opted to attack. For 3 grueling days, Cortés's small army endured brutal skirmishes against a far larger and well-organized force. Outnumbered and exhausted, the Spaniards were on the verge of collapse, but instead of pressing the attack to total annihilation, the Tlaxcalans unexpectedly paused. Some captured Spaniards had relayed a message, translated through Marina and Aguilar, that Cortés was not their enemy, but their potential ally against the common oppressor, the Aztecs. The message spread quickly, aided by the diplomatic finesse of Marina. Curious, and perhaps impressed by the Spaniards' resilience, the Tlaxcalan leaders agreed to meet Cortés. What followed was a remarkable reversal. Not only did they agree to an alliance, but they also offered hundreds of warriors, supplies, and even arranged political marriages to cement the partnership. The Spaniards rested and regrouped in Tlaxcala. Their numbers bolstered, their morale restored. They were no longer a band of isolated foreigners. They were now part of a growing coalition. Cortés knew that without the Tlaxcalans, his campaign would have ended in the highlands. But with them, the doors to Tenochtitlan were starting to open. With the Tlaxcalans now firmly at his side, Cortés marched toward the sacred city of Cholula, one of the most important religious centers in Mesoamerica and a strategic waypoint en route to Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs considered Cholula a loyal vassal and an extension of their spiritual authority. At first, the Spanish and their native allies were welcomed without hostility, but the atmosphere soon shifted. Marina, ever observant and astute, uncovered a chilling plot. According to a local noblewoman, the city's leadership had been instructed by Moctezuma to betray the Spaniards, ambushing them during the night and slaughtering them in their sleep. Whether the story was entirely true or not remains debated, but Cortés didn't take chances. He summoned the city's leaders to a meeting, then ordered a surprise attack. What followed was a massacre. Hundreds of Cholulans were killed, the city set ablaze, and survivors scattered in terror. The Spanish later claimed it was a preemptive strike against treachery. Critics called it a ruthless demonstration of power. Regardless of motive, the result was clear. The massacre at Cholula sent a message across the region. Resistance to the Spaniards would be met with overwhelming brutality. For Moctezuma, it marked a turning point. No longer could he treat the foreigners as guests or curiosities. They were a threat, and yet, rather than immediately attack, he invited them to his capital. Some historians believe Moctezuma hoped to contain the threat diplomatically, while others argue he saw them as divine messengers. Whatever the reason, the invitation was sent, and Cortés accepted. With thousands of native allies at his back and a growing reputation for strength and ruthlessness, he marched toward the beating heart of the Aztec world. On November 8, 1519, Hernán Cortés and his multi-ethnic army arrived at the entrance to Tenochtitlan, the dazzling capital of the Aztec Empire. What they witnessed was nothing short of surreal. Built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, the city was accessible by massive stone causeways and traversed by an intricate network of canals. Towering temples rose above neatly organized. Neighborhoods and marketplaces bustled with thousands of merchants selling goods from across Mesoamerica. At its center stood the sacred Templo Mayor, an imposing symbol of Aztec religious and political power. Cortés, though undoubtedly familiar with tales of grandeur, could not have imagined such a place. A city home to upwards of 300,000 people, rivaling or surpassing any European city of the era. Waiting on one of the great causeways to greet the Spaniards in person was Emperor Moctezuma II. Dressed in ceremonial finery, adorned in gold and precious feathers, and surrounded by his elite entourage. Rather than waging war or denying them entry, Moctezuma welcomed Cortés and his men with open arms and offered gifts of immense value. The reasons for this gesture remain one of history's great mysteries. Was Moctezuma attempting to avoid conflict? Did he believe Cortés was a divine emissary, as some sources suggest? Or was he merely stalling, buying time to assess the threat? Whatever his motives, the Spaniards were invited into the heart of the empire and given residence within the city itself. Though the Aztecs treated them with apparent reverence, Cortés remained wary. He understood the danger of his position. Surrounded, outnumbered, and at the mercy of a powerful ruler whose intentions were still unclear. The first days in Tenochtitlan passed without violence, but the tension simmered just beneath the surface. Cortés knew that his tenuous presence in the capital relied entirely on diplomacy and manipulation. He needed leverage, something to ensure Moctezuma's cooperation and the safety of his men. In a move as audacious as it was dangerous, he orchestrated a coup from within. Leveraging the emperor's hospitality and the trust that had been extended to him, Cortés managed to seize Moctezuma and place him under house arrest within his own palace. It's still unclear how exactly this was accomplished without immediate bloodshed, but sources suggest that the emperor was either tricked or pressured into compliance. While Moctezuma retained his title and continued to appear in public, all major decisions were now influenced or dictated by Cortés. Through Marina, the Spaniards issued commands in the emperor's name, transforming him into a puppet ruler. This gave the appearance of continuity, while allowing Cortés to expand his power discreetly. Scouts were dispatched to explore surrounding regions for gold and military advantage, and reports began arriving of Aztec unrest. Then, in a stunning twist, Cortés learned that a new threat loomed, not from the Aztecs but from his own people. Governor Velázquez, furious at the mutiny, had dispatched a second, larger Spanish force under Pánfilo de Narváez to arrest or kill Cortés. The expedition's legality was finally catching up with him. Realizing he could not wait passively, Cortés made a bold decision. He left a skeleton force in charge of Tenochtitlan and marched out with his most trusted soldiers to confront the oncoming Spanish army. The empire he sought to conquer was now suspended in uncertainty, and the greatest challenge yet would not come from its warriors, but from his own kind. If you've made it this far into the story, you're clearly enjoying it, or at least intrigued. So why not take a moment to hit the like button and follow the channel? It helps us keep sharing stories like this and lets you know when the next chapter is out. Cortés marched quickly toward the coast, accompanied by 250 of his best Spanish fighters and around 200 native allies. He knew he would be outnumbered, but he also understood something that Narváez did not: the terrain, the politics, and the fragile alliances underpinning Spanish power in the region. Narváez's force was nearly double in size and better equipped, with more horses, cannons, and gunpowder. But they were also new to the land, unfamiliar with its conditions, and overconfident. Cortés planned to use surprise as his primary weapon. In a daring nighttime assault during a torrential downpour, his troops overwhelmed Narváez's camp at Chempoala. They targeted artillery and horses first, throwing the larger army into chaos. The swift and coordinated strike caught Narváez completely off guard. He was wounded and captured, and within hours, the once formidable arrest party had disintegrated. But Cortés's victory didn't end with the battle. As word of the wealth he had already amassed spread through the ranks of Narváez's army, many of them defected and joined his cause, enticed by promises of gold and adventure. In a single night, Cortés more than doubled his forces. It was an extraordinary reversal. The man sent to be arrested not only avoided capture, but also absorbed the army sent against him. Yet this triumph would be short-lived. When he returned to Tenochtitlan just weeks later, he found the city in revolt, his political puppet Moctezuma disgraced, and his remaining men barely clinging to life inside the palace. While he had dealt with the Spanish threat, his absence had plunged the Aztec capital into chaos. The situation in Tenochtitlan had unraveled rapidly. During Cortés's absence, he had left the volatile Pedro de Alvarado in command. A skilled fighter, but known for his impulsive and brutal nature, Alvarado had made a catastrophic decision. During a religious festival in honor of the god Tezcatlipoca, held in the heart of the city, Alvarado ordered a surprise attack on unarmed Aztec nobles and priests participating in the ceremony. The massacre was horrific. Hundreds were slaughtered within minutes, many still dressed in ceremonial robes and jewelry. The Spanish claimed it was a preemptive strike, prompted by rumors of an uprising. But to the Aztecs, it was a cowardly and unprovoked bloodbath. The reaction was swift and furious. The city erupted in open rebellion. When Cortés returned, he walked into a siege. The palace compound was under constant assault. Moctezuma, now seen as a traitor by his own people, attempted to address the crowds from the rooftop in an effort to restore calm. Instead, he was pelted with stones and mortally wounded. Whether by his own subjects or at Spanish hands remains debated. What is clear is that Moctezuma died a broken and powerless figure, a tragic symbol of imperial collapse. With their position increasingly untenable, Cortés and his men knew they had to escape. On a moonless night, they attempted a desperate retreat, carrying with them as much gold as they could bear. But they were discovered. Aztec warriors unleashed a fierce counterattack from land, rooftops, and canoes. The causeways became killing fields. Many Spaniards, weighed down by their stolen treasure, drowned in the lake. Of the nearly 1,300 who attempted the escape, only a few hundred survived. It would later be known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Cortés barely escaped with his life, bloodied, demoralized, and with the remnants of his once confident army. In tatters, he retreated toward Tlaxcala. There, the Tlaxcalans once again proved to be his lifeline. Rather than abandoning the Spanish in their moment of weakness, they offered refuge, food, and medical assistance to the survivors. More than that, they remained committed to the alliance. The Tlaxcalans had suffered too long under Aztec rule to let this rare opportunity for revenge slip away. As Cortés recovered, he re-evaluated his strategy. No longer could he rely on diplomacy or subterfuge. If he was to take Tenochtitlan, he would need to do it by force. Over the next 6 months, he began preparing for a full-scale siege. He gathered reinforcements, forged new alliances with other discontented indigenous groups, and trained his army in coordination with native warriors. His numbers swelled. What had started as a force of hundreds now included over 10,000 native allies, soon to become 200,000 by the end of the campaign. Cortés also commissioned the construction of brigantines, small, flat-bottomed boats that would be assembled and deployed on Lake Texcoco to counter the Aztecs' canoe warfare. He would cut off the capital from its food, water, and reinforcements. The plan was grim and methodical. Isolate the city, starve it, and crush it street by street. As the Spanish marched back toward the lake in late 1520, they no longer resembled a vulnerable expedition. They had become a hybrid army, part European, part indigenous, bound not just by conquest, but by a shared desire to bring down the empire that had long ruled with terror and blood. By May 1521, the siege of Tenochtitlan had officially begun. The once mighty city, still recovering from the devastation of smallpox and political upheaval, found itself increasingly isolated. The Spanish and their native allies systematically dismantled surrounding settlements, cutting off supply lines and burning anything that might support the Aztec capital. The newly built brigantines were launched onto Lake Texcoco, patrolling the waters and intercepting any canoes attempting to bring in food or escape with messages. The causeways, once proud pathways linking the island to the mainland, became battlegrounds. Aztec warriors fought with unmatched tenacity, defending their home against overwhelming odds. But for every Spaniard lost, Cortés had dozens more allies to replace them. The Aztecs, by contrast, saw their ranks thinning and their people starving. With the city's aqueducts destroyed, clean water became scarce. Disease spread and desperation took hold. Still, the defenders refused to surrender. Battles raged across canals and atop temples. Captured Spanish soldiers were dragged to the Templo Mayor, where they were sacrificed before the gods. A final cry of defiance from a civilization under siege. But divine favor would not come. Day by day, the city crumbled. On August 13, 1521, after nearly 3 months of relentless fighting, the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, was captured while attempting to flee. By canoe, the remaining defenders surrendered, and the Spanish stormed what was left of the once glorious capital. Fires consumed temples, palaces collapsed into rubble, and the streets ran with blood. The fall of Tenochtitlan did not just mark the collapse of an empire, it signaled the beginning of a new, foreign world imposed by conquest. In its ashes, Cortés would build Mexico City, but what was lost in that conquest, the identity, sovereignty, and spirit of an entire people, would echo for centuries to come. After the smoke settled and the echoes of war faded, Hernán Cortés wasted no time in laying the foundations of a new colonial capital, Mexico City. Built atop the ruins of Tenochtitlán, the city quickly became the nerve center of Spanish rule in the New World. Over time, the lake that had once given life and protection to the Aztecs was deliberately drained, erasing the natural defenses that had made the old city nearly impregnable. The new settlement grew rapidly, not only as a symbol of victory, but as a launch pad for further conquests into Central and South America. The Spanish dismantled temples and pyramids, repurposing the stone to construct cathedrals, palaces, and administrative buildings. Indigenous labor was forcibly conscripted under the encomienda system, and entire communities were uprooted to make way for colonial infrastructure. For the native peoples, the transition was not just physical, but spiritual. A systematic erasure of culture, religion, and identity. Churches rose where temples once stood, and crosses replaced sunstones. Yet beneath this imposed transformation, fragments of the old world endured. Some native traditions survived in secret, others blended with European customs, forming syncretic practices that remain alive to this day. Meanwhile, Cortés's political ambitions faced new challenges. Despite delivering the crown one of its greatest territorial acquisitions, he was never fully trusted by the Spanish monarchy. His insubordination during the early phases of the conquest had not been forgotten. Though he was initially granted titles and land, true political power in New Spain was handed to bureaucrats sent directly from Spain. Cortés would live the rest of his life navigating both admiration and suspicion, celebrated as a conqueror, yet regarded as a dangerous symbol of rogue authority. While the military conquest of the Aztecs was dramatic and violent, it was the silent, microscopic invader that wrought the most devastating blow. Smallpox, carried unknowingly by Spanish soldiers during their early encounters, spread like wildfire through the indigenous population. The disease arrived in 1520, likely introduced by the men of Pánfilo de Narváez's expedition, and quickly took root in the densely populated capital. With no prior exposure to the virus, the Aztecs had zero immunity. Entire families perished within days. Neighborhoods became mass graves. Priests, warriors, commoners, even emperors succumbed to the disease. Within just a few months, nearly half of Tenochtitlan's population had died. The epidemic wasn't contained to the capital. It spread outward, infecting trade routes and reaching distant provinces, killing millions. Historians estimate that in the decades following the conquest, the indigenous population of central Mexico plummeted from approximately 30 million to just 3 million. Smallpox was soon followed by measles, typhus, and influenza, each wave compounding. The demographic collapse. No sword or musket could rival the efficiency of these old-world diseases. The Spanish didn't understand the biology of what was happening, but they saw the effects. Fewer warriors to fight, fewer mouths to feed, fewer voices to resist. The psychological toll was just as severe. Entire communities, convinced the gods had abandoned them, lost the will to resist. For Cortés and his successors, these plagues were grim allies, indifferent, invisible, and unstoppable. Though the conquest is often remembered for its battles and betrayals, the quiet spread of disease did more to break the backbone of resistance than any cannon or cavalry charge. It was the true engine behind the fall of an empire, and a brutal reminder of how history can be shaped not only by heroes and villains, but by forces no one can see. The psychological and cultural devastation wrought by disease, war, and colonization left scars that would endure for centuries. Entire lineages were wiped out. Cities that once pulsed with color, ritual, and commerce became shadows of themselves, reduced to rubble or converted into colonial outposts. The survivors faced a new reality where their gods were forbidden, their language suppressed, and their customs outlawed or mocked. Generations of knowledge were lost as scribes and scholars were executed or silenced, and sacred texts were burned. For the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica, daily life became a negotiation for survival. Some assimilated to avoid persecution, others resisted in hidden ways, through stories, songs, or clandestine rituals. The trauma of the conquest was not just physical, but existential, a forced identity crisis imposed on millions. Yet even in this darkness, elements of resilience began to take root. Communities began to rebuild. The Nahuatl language persisted, often spoken in whispers, passed down in kitchens and marketplaces. New religious expressions formed, blending Catholic saints with ancient deities, transforming the old into something new. The native population, though decimated, was not eradicated. Their bloodlines endured, their stories evolved, and their spirit refused to vanish. Across the territory of what had been the Aztec Empire, a hybrid culture was being born, not entirely Spanish, not purely indigenous, but something in between. This new identity would become the foundation for a future Mexican nation. The defeat had been total in military terms, but culturally the battle was more complex and far from over. What Hernán Cortés never could have foreseen was that even in conquest, control would remain elusive, and the legacy of the people he thought he had destroyed would survive in ways he could never erase. By the late 16th century, New Spain had become the crown jewel of the Spanish colonial empire in the Americas. From the ashes of the Aztec capital, a sprawling city emerged, populated by Spanish settlers, mestizos, and surviving indigenous communities. Mexico City became a hub of commerce, governance, and cultural fusion. Roads expanded, churches rose skyward, and universities were founded. But beneath the surface grandeur, tensions simmered. Colonial society was rigidly hierarchical, with Spaniards born in Europe at the top and indigenous peoples at the bottom. The mestizo class, born of unions, sometimes consensual, often coerced between Spaniards and natives, began to grow rapidly. They represented a new social order and a new cultural voice, one that would eventually push back against colonial domination. Cortés himself faded into a more symbolic figure. He spent his remaining years entangled in legal battles over land and recognition, frequently traveling between Spain and Mexico. Though he was awarded titles and wealth, his political ambitions were consistently curtailed. The Spanish crown, wary of empowering too independent a figure, ensured he would never again wield the level of influence he had during the conquest. By the time of his death in 1547, Cortés had become both a legend and a liability, honored in some circles, reviled in others. His conquest had redrawn the map of the world, but the cost of that victory remained hotly debated. Millions had died, and entire civilizations were transformed or destroyed. Still, the world he helped create continued to grow, shaped by forces he could never fully control. The legacy of Cortés is inseparable from the birth of modern Mexico, a complex figure in a complex history, both a conqueror and catalyst, remembered as much for the end he delivered as for what rose painfully from its ruins. Centuries have passed since the fall of the Aztec Empire, but the echoes of that colossal shift continue to reverberate. The conquest of Tenochtitlan was not just the collapse of a political regime. It was the beginning of a cultural transformation that would define the identity of an entire region. From that fusion of blood, belief, and survival emerged something enduring: the modern Mexican people. They are not merely descendants of Spaniards or Aztecs, but of warriors and poets, farmers and priests, conquerors and survivors. The streets of Mexico City still sit atop the foundations of Tenochtitlan, and in some neighborhoods, fragments of the old empire, stone carvings, language patterns, even culinary traditions persist in daily life. The resilience of indigenous identity is undeniable. Festivals still honor ancient spirits, crafts retain ancestral techniques, and Nahuatl continues to be spoken across the countryside. What was meant to be erased has instead become embedded in the nation's cultural DNA. This layered heritage is both a source of pride and a reminder of pain. While the conquest brought catastrophic loss, it also gave birth to a story of persistence, adaptation, and rebirth. The descendants of those who once walked the causeways of Tenochtitlan have not only survived, they have shaped a nation, influenced a continent, and contributed to a global identity. History did not stop with defeat. It transformed, evolved, and endured. And through that evolution, the spirit of a people has remained fiercely alive. In reflecting on the saga of Hernán Cortés and the fall of the Aztecs, it's tempting to see the event solely as a tragic clash of civilizations or a brutal chapter of conquest. But within that narrative lies something more universal, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. Empires rise and fall, borders shift, and leaders vanish into history, but the will to survive, to reclaim meaning in the face of devastation, never truly dies. The story of the Aztec collapse is also the story of those who found strength amid loss, who rebuilt from ashes, and who refused to let their culture disappear. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments of history, resilience has the power to outlast oppression. Today, the descendants of both conquerors and conquered walk the same streets, share the same language, and carry the intertwined legacy of triumph and trauma. Their coexistence is not perfect, but it is real, and it speaks to the possibility of healing, of understanding, and of honoring the past, while forging a new path forward. The fall of the Aztec Empire did not mark the end of a people. It marked the beginning of a new identity, one born from struggle, shaped by conflict, and strengthened by the unbreakable will to endure. That is the true legacy of this chapter in history. Not conquest, but continuity. Not ruin, but rebirth. And in that rebirth, the promise that no matter how deep the fall, there is always a way to rise. Now that you've reached the end of this powerful story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part struck you the most? Do you see this chapter of history differently now? Leave a comment below. Your feedback means a lot and helps shape the future of this channel.